Hi, good afternoon, Hamish. Good to see you.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, I'm in good form, thanks. Good form.
Good.
Look, I have to say, I always see you as a bit of a benchmark during this crisis because, well, as much as hospitality has been affected, the airline business has been probably more affected than almost any other sector.
Yeah,
They must have been tough.
it's been a fascinating few months to work and live through, I think. This is certainly unprecedented. And in my 25 years in hospitality, we've seen, times when things have been a little bit tough and we've seen 5 or 10% reductions in volume. But what we're going through now from an airline perspective is tenfold, really. It's on a different level, and it's challenging for everybody involved, and leading a team of people through this time is challenging. Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, airlines, and it's still the airline first kind of thing. I mean, the forecast is not really going to get back into any strength for another 3 or 4 years, is it?
I think where I speak to lots of people, and we're positive that things are going to improve. People want to travel. I think we're really interested in getting away from our daily lives, and people, my wife and family included, are desperate to get on planes and get away for a bit of R&R. And I think that's who we are as humans. I think it's a really inherent part of life, is seeing new things, experiencing new things, and airline travel has become a part of our daily lives, and will continue to be so. Yeah.
So you're being a bit more positive. You see a better recovery.
I think it's unknown at the moment, but I think we need to be positive on every level, and I think people just need to sort of understand that this is a phase we're going through, and we need to look to get back to some sense of normality. Can't keep just shrinking back into our homes and not sort of trying to get out and making the most of the situation.
Now, your role has been overseeing a number of different countries worldwide. Yeah. It must be very strange just to see all that almost come to a stop overnight as we work through it.
It's been fascinating, and it's been tough. I think people globally are really experiencing different emotions, different things. What's happening in Australia is different to what's happening in the US, is what's different to happening in the Middle East. We're going through different phases of this. Australia, that had a really positive response early on, is now in a different position to where they were a few months ago.
Because Melbourne went into lockdown again, didn't it?
It did. Melbourne's gone back into lockdown last week, and they've gone into lockdown for 6 weeks. And you've got borders closing between Victoria and New South Wales, and the Australian government has put in some fairly challenging sort of restrictions on travel to Australia and travel within Australia. Yeah.
It seems like a long time ago since the crisis in Australia at the beginning of the year, doesn't it?
It does. The Australians have had a challenging 12 months with bushfires, and now COVID-19.
It seems such a long time ago. It's really strange.
Yeah, it is. Definitely.
Sorry, return to the job. It must have been strange after being so busy worldwide and seeing, because you're doing quite a lot of growth, and then seeing that all that's kind of come to a halt.
Yeah, I think it's business though. As business people, we are constantly, pivoting, changing, learning how to cope with a changing situation. And I think we have responded. And I see lots of people and lots of businesses responding really positively to what is an incredibly difficult time. I see lots of companies, understanding that sales are dipping, they've got surplus inventory, they're donating that to charity. I see lots of work where, us included, have sort of being able to, look at what we do, find, areas that need help. And whether that's donating inventory, whether it's, donating time to worthy causes, I think, I've been really impressed with the hospitality industry and industry as a whole of how they've really risen to the challenge and supporting, whether it's the clap for the NHS, whether it's, donating food to key workers, whether it's looking after homeless people and providing food in those sort of environments. I've just been super impressed. Right across the globe, we've seen people rise to the challenge of the community, and I think that's really heartwarming.
There is, and there's a really positive story to be told, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, what's been the hardest piece for you during this period?
Look, I think staying positive. I think as leaders we have to constantly, portray a positive outlook. We have to look for the glass half full every single time, even though deep down we might have our own reservations. And I think I've had to work at remaining positive and really looking to how we can, make the most of every situation. And I think also accepting that there isn't a quick, easy turnaround to some of this. I said to a few people that, when we left the office in mid-March to go into a lockdown situation, I think we all thought this will be, probably 6 weeks and we'll be back at work and the business will be back to normal in 3 months. How wrong we were. And, I've said to a lot of people, the fact that it has been such a challenging, drawn out process, it's actually a really interesting time to really take stock and look at your business and see what, you can do. And I think we effectively look at ourselves now as a startup. Everything that we used to know, we can effectively leave in the past, and we can now build a business moving forward with our knowledge of the industry, our knowledge of customers, our knowledge of supply chain management globally, and make sure we fix the wrongs of the past and, come forward with a better business model moving forward. So it's actually given us a great opportunity to take stock and do some, hard thinking, and really analyze some things that we can improve moving forward, which you can live with when things are just cracking along and you're growing, and you don't have to necessarily worry about some of those.
I mean, that's the really interesting thing, is that you're right. I mean, there's no excuse for any company not to look at their models and actually got back to core messages. I think the great bit is the unknown still, what's facing us.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the amount of calls I get every day about saying, well, what do we think is going to be the case in September? What do we think the case is going to be in October? But actually, it's incredibly hard to judge anything at the moment. And it does seem to be London is the problem basket case, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think I just think there's so much unknown, and I don't think if you try and solve the problem and have a plan every day, you're going to fail every day, because things are changing so quickly every day. And I just think that I think we as a business, and I see lots of other businesses, you need to almost accept that this is going to take some time, and look slightly longer with a slightly vaguer plan, but still have a vision of where you want to be, maybe in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, as things start to get back to some level of normality. But in the space of a week, so many things change, and we hear good news, we hear bad news, we hear we need to wear face masks, we don't need to wear face masks, and then we are wearing face masks. It's that type of changing message at all levels, and some planes are flying, some planes aren't flying. New business opportunities are there, they're not. It's changing too quickly, and you need to perhaps take stock and have a slightly longer, broader plan for the future. And I think that's where we are. We're sort of trying to look and be ready for next year, which we know will be a much better sort of situation for everybody. Yeah.
I certainly hope so. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I mean, every business model, every business is going to be adapting all over the place. I mean, again, that's the thing. And again, interestingly, for the airline business, what went before will never exist again, will it? In the same way, it'll come back. I think you're right, because people will travel. But it's going to be very different.
I think we all look at things with a relatively short window of experience. Your window of experience, my window of experience in business is about 25, 30 years, and if you look back, what's happened in 100 years. We've had world wars, we've had, you know, Great Depressions, all sorts of things that if you were living at that time, you would have a different perspective of what we're going through now. But I think what's different here is that we haven't gone through one of those world-changing sort of experiences. And I think that's a really interesting sort of, you know, time in history to live through, you know, and I think, you know, if it wasn't so serious, it's fascinating to sort of be on the fence looking in, really, of what's going on. Yeah.
And actually, talking about yourself, because obviously you founded your career in Australia, but you've almost found us kind of home, haven't you, in the UK? You see, I mean, ever since you first arrived in the UK, you've actually fallen in love with Europe quite a lot, haven't you?
Absolutely. I think that's part of my history as Australian. You know, Australians are great travellers. You know, on the other side of the world, they've always looked to Europe. They've looked to, you know, North America and places like that to sort of spend some time. And, you know, I've lived in North America and Canada in my sort of 20s. Loved travelling during that time. And I like travelling. I like immersing myself in a culture by living there rather than just sort of spending a week on holiday somewhere. I like to, you know, get under the skin of a place and feel like you belong. And certainly living in the UK has become home. And, you know, I've said to you previously, I'm not sure that, you know, we will return to Australia to live. You know, never say never. You know, and what's happening now, it might be more attractive to live in Australia in the future. But, you know, I think, you know, for us, once you experience living on a world stage, rather than living just on an Australian-centric stage, it is a big difference to, you know, where you are. And I think, you know, 11 years ago when we left Australia, you know, we did so with a great job offer, you know, and it was a real adventure for us. And it took us about 2 hours to decide we'd take that opportunity. And I think, you know, seizing opportunities as they come along is an absolutely lesson that everybody can learn. You know, the old adage, opportunity only knocks once, is so true. And we would, as a family, we haven't regretted, you know, for 1 minute, sort of the decision to come and relocate to the other side of the world and everything that we've learned along the way. And there's been good times and more challenging times, as you know. And, you know, I think we've got through all of that, and that's, you know, it's part of life's great adventure. Yeah,
it's part of the outlook, isn't it? Because again, you've always seemed to very calmly take the good and the bad in equal measure. But actually, people today, as we discussed, particularly young ones, are much more afraid of failing. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it is about how do we encourage people now to do exactly the kind of life you've been leading yourself over the last 30 years. How we need to encourage people to take that kind of risk again, don't we?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to reflect, you know, my early business career and, you know, how business operates these days. You know, in my early years as a sort of a manager in the hospitality industry, you know, there was an expectation that things would just take a bit of time because there wasn't email, there wasn't mobile phones. You know, you went and had a meeting, you wrote up the minutes from the meeting later that day, it then went in the mail or potentially by fax the next day or the day after. There wasn't the immediacy that, you know, news is shared or the expectation that people have for a quick response. And I think that aspect of, you know, growing up as a manager and learning about life, then you had to make decisions because you couldn't send somebody an email and say, I need you to make the decision for me. You just had to make a decision because you're sitting in front of a client or a customer, and you have to give them a solution and stand behind that solution. These days, it's quite easy to sort of say, well, I'll come back to you with an answer, and you can get an answer from somebody else reasonably quickly, whereas I think historically you don't. And I think that type of change in business, you know, and those early learnings for me have really sort of meant that you've got to put on a positive solution-driven, you know, response all the time. You've got to be able to stand behind what you commit to, you know, in a face-to-face meeting, rather than standing behind a sort of an email or something like that. And I think
now, if I remember rightly, when you were in your younger years, you were a great surfer, weren't you?
I'll still try to surf,
I
it
know
gets
you
harder
do.
as you get older, but, I think like most Australians, I grew up on the beach, and surfing, swimming, outdoor activity has been a core part of my life. And I think, continues to be so. I'm still active. I still exercise every day in some form, might be a bit slower walking rather than, more high action stuff. But I think that's part of, I would say my Australian roots, getting outside every day, trying to experience nature, trying to experience, the rush, being competitive, from a sporting perspective and even a business perspective is sort of just who I am. And I think it's part of it.
Because that's the great piece about you, because you are an ultimate competitor, but you've got this very calm exterior.
I try to. I think that's a learned behaviour rather than my natural default position. I think I am competitive. I've grown up in a competitive family. Two brothers and a sister, and a high achieving father and mother. It's always been competitive, and it's always that's where I've got my work ethic from. My family roots, and certainly I think Australians are known to be hard workers, as are the English. People work hard, and I think that's stood me well in my career.
And you came across originally for the London Olympics. Right?
Yeah, that was part of my brief. As you know, the company that I was working with for most of my career in Australia made an acquisition in the UK, the USA, and the Middle East, and I came across to head up the integration of that business into our Australian, New Zealand business as well, and have a focus on the London Olympics and secure some of the contracts for the London Olympics, which we did successfully. Very much a team effort, but it was a great experience to go through. Arriving in the UK as the bidding process sort of started for the Olympics, understanding how the Olympics was put together, and then work on some of the planning.
And what was the hardest part for you to adapt and live in the UK?
I think culturally there are significant differences between the English and Australians, and I would have never have thought that when I was in Australia. I would have thought, I'm going to England, the old country, they're all part of the same stock. It can't be that different, but there are differences, and that was certainly challenging. I think the fact that England, whilst being a small country geographically compared to Australia, culturally, even in the UK, there's huge differences between Scotland, the north of England, the west of England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England. They're all separate countries. They have different cultures. The Midlands has a different culture to London. And I think, as Australians, fundamentally, you're Australian, there's a bit of interstate rivalry between, the states, but generally there's not a huge cultural difference in how people behave.
And did you find it great in the UK than when you went to live in the US?
Look, I think when I lived in Canada and North America, I was in my mid-20s, and very much in the early stages of my career working in hotels and, probably skiing more than I worked. But, once again, that was a great experience, and I think taught me a lot about service, taught me a lot about customer service from a hospitality perspective. At that time in the mid 80s, the US and Canada were leading the world in customer service. And I think I learnt a lot about hotel operations, restaurant operations during that time, and the importance of looking after customers, because that, in a very, gratuity or tip driven type economy as well at that level, you had to provide great service if you wanted to earn, decent money. So, that was a really interesting, time in my life. And I have fond memories of that as a sort of in my mid-20s. But I know I learnt a lot. And I went back to Australia and, joined Spotless Group, who was sort of, I spent most of my career with, and, was lucky enough during that time to work with some fantastic, people and mentors, who really let me, learn along the way, gave me guidance, but let me make mistakes. And that I think once again has stood me well. And then, obviously culminating in coming to the UK and working on a global stage has been, the absolutely outstanding, part of my career as well. And I've loved every minute of it. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, you've been doing about a decade now working on the global stage.
Yeah.
Covering the US, Middle East, and Europe, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how you found the differences at the moment in that?
Look, it's just second nature, I think. In Australia, fundamentally Australia, I used to look after New Zealand as well. The slight difference between the two are reasonably, there's probably a 6-hour time difference from one side of the business to the other. These days, looking after a business that operates globally, we operate 24/7, literally, so the time challenges of when you can schedule meetings, when you can interact with people, having to do a lot of your interactions over Teams or Zoom or phone calls is certainly different when you're trying to manage people and lead people and work with people. And I think that's interesting. But I love the fact that I've been exposed and had opportunities to travel to all around the world for business, which is one thing doing it for holidays and things like that, but business is another level. And I just I get a real kick out of meeting people in all parts of the world, and interacting with them. And I'm privileged that in the morning I can be speaking to somebody in Australia on a business call, middle of the day people throughout the UK or Europe, and then later in the day having a discussion with somebody in the US, and I think the global nature of business over these days is fascinating for me. And I think you don't get that in Australia. There's obviously global businesses in Australia, but not to the extent that I'm lucky enough to be involved with at the moment. So,
and how's this period changed you? Because obviously you've changed quite a lot over the years. How has this particular period impacted?
I think I've become calmer, less stressed, and which is probably counterintuitive for the challenges that we've been going through. But I've got to say I'm sleeping better than I probably ever have, mainly because I'm exhausted at the end of the day. But I've learned to control what I can control and let what I can't control go. And I think that comes, for me, it's come with, maturity and years of, understanding, what you can and can't control. And I think, it's interesting you say you think I'm calm on the exterior, and I think I am much calmer now than I was 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, which is good, and as I should be, in life.
I think it's a hard trick to learn, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I'm sure Kerry, my wife, wouldn't say that I'm calm all the time, but I still have a lot of energy, so I still channel that physical energy into exercise and things like that. But the business stress doesn't bother me as much as it used to, and I think that's a positive thing.
And what do you hope now will come out of this period? What do you, as the changes we see?
Great question. I think I'd like to see the great work that companies have done in looking a little bit outside their sort of normal business sphere, supporting, whether it's charities, whether it's, other non-profit organizations. I would love to see that continue. And I fear that, as things start to ramp back up to normal, some of the great initiatives that have been undertaken will fall by the wayside. I hear lots of discussions that people don't want that to happen, and I'm encouraged by that. I would love to think that we are going to continue to, allocate some of our time as a business, and I would like to think that society is going to allocate time to, looking to support people without a profit motive.
I know we discussed this a lot. One of the biggest challenges is going to be about leadership, isn't it? Because we've obviously got this problem about getting people back into work in London. And the logical thing, I guess, is that the government tell the civil service to go back into work would be a good place to start. But they aren't.
Example. Yeah.
Well, exactly. But that's not happening, is it? And this mishmash, wishy-washy messaging is actually causing a real problem, isn't it?
No, I think so. I think, I'm a great advocate of strong leadership. And I think leading from the front, you're not going to get all the decisions right. But I think you've got to pin your colours to the mast and sort of say, well, this is the way we're going to go. And I think people appreciate that. And I think throughout this process, from a government perspective, we've seen some inconsistencies. But, I think broadly speaking, I would like to think that, we accept that we've got to get back to work at some point. We've got to get ahead. It's a bit like the Brexit discussion. We've made a decision. We've now got to get ahead and deliver it in a positive way. And I think the worst thing we can do is not make decisions and not move forward. We've got to accept this is a situation. We've just got to now make the most of it and get out of it. And I think, I hope people are going to just, understand that if they're sensible, they listen to the guidelines, that they're going to get out and, we're going to get back to normal quickly. Yeah.
It's going to be, I just find it fascinating because everywhere I go, talk to around the country, people tell me the regions are really busy.
Yeah.
Including, I was talking to, obviously, Alex up in Scotland, who told me he's having traffic jams outside Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Yet still, if you go into London, it's like a ghost town.
Yeah, I think, I observe what's happening around, winds where I am, and also, I think other places, even around, where we live. It's almost quieter this week than it was 2 weeks ago when things started to unlock. And I think that is something we need to watch out for. We need to get people, over the hump and back to work. And I think some clear guidance that, and I'm confident that, we're now coming into what is traditionally a quieter period, August, school holidays, so it will be naturally a quieter period. But I'm hopeful that, when school comes back, and, things hopefully return to perhaps the normal cycle in September, everything will get back to some sense of normality, and we will be on the road with a vengeance, and, in the lead up to Christmas. Yeah.
Let's put you on the spot as we come towards the end.
Yeah.
So when do you think the economy will get back into proper recovery mode as a whole? I won't put you on the spot regarding airlines.
I'm not an expert. I'm not an economist, Chris. But I think, as I said on the video, this forum we had last week, I honestly believe that, the next 6 months we'll be on a bit of a roller coaster. We'll be up and down a little bit as news becomes positive and negative. I think, realistically, I'm forecasting that come the spring next year, things will really kick off again. And I think, we will get back to a position where, we've gone through the winter, which is potentially an area of risk if you listen to what's going on in the media. And when the sun starts shining in March or April next year in the UK, things are going to kick off again. And I think that's, that's my prediction, but don't hold me to it.
Okay, so a tough 8 months, and then we'll be through it, hopefully, and start.
Yeah, I think as I've said, there's green shoots and things are getting better every day. So I don't think I just think it'll be a bit slower over the next few months. I don't think it's going to necessarily be any tougher than it has been. I just think we will see a slow recovery. We'll be on a sort of a slow incline and improvement over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And then, winter's naturally quieter, in the Northern Hemisphere anyway. And spring is sort of, I think people will get another sense of, keepers where, but this has been going on for 12 months. We need to get out and make the most of life. Yeah.
Well, that's the point. We need an energy, don't we, to get there?
Yeah. And I think winter's traditionally a hard time to get people motivated you know, on some levels, you know, and, you know, in the spring next year, we'll be really firing. But look, I think, you know, I said we're going to see a bit of a peak over the next 6 weeks. You know, it's summer as well. You know, we've had a great summer so far in the UK and in Europe. Let's hope that continues, and, you know, people can be outside and back.
No, I know quickly, I know you escaped to France last week for a few days. How was that? How did you find it?
It was great. It was fantastic. The sun was shining, and, you know, I think it was a different experience. You know, as I said, I went to a different part of France that I hadn't been to. You know, it was certainly probably quieter than I expected, but people were out and about, and, you know, things are getting back to normal. And I think that's what we've just got to accept, that things will get back to normal. And, you know, whether we're wearing masks or, you know, standing 1 metre or 2 metres apart from one another, people want to experience hospitality. They want to experience, you know, all those things they love doing, eating, drinking. You know, we are social animals, and we need that interaction. And certainly, you know, from a French perspective, you know, the waiters and you know, the cafe owners, they all had masks on, but they were interacting quite comfortably with the public, and it was business as usual. You know, albeit most of the service was out on terraces and outside, which was, you know, fantastic. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Hamish. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And always thank you for being gracious when Australia beat England. I have to say, it was very good that way.
Oh, let's hope that continues. Yeah.
Well, or not.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks very much
Okay.
indeed. Have a good day.
That's great. Yeah.